My name is Rob Rebman. My folks came to this area in the 1860s, sort of indirectly from Germany. My grandmother was from Cornersville, Tennessee, and she brings in a whole bunch of family, Robins and Dabneys, and Daddy had Ludwigs and Rebmans back in the old country. And I spent a good part of my life just trying to track that down. And I had a bunch of great aunts and two uncles, but they weren't given to writing things down and talking to little children about it, so I had to listen good and catch on. And that's what I've done with this. I'll tell you how this got started. About right after 2000, Courtland downtown started disappearing, one store at a time, and it was just the times. And Ted Letson was our mayor, and Ted did a very good job in a lot of ways. I'm sure if I lived here, I could point out a couple of uh-ohs, but basically he did a lot of forward-thinking things. And one thing was, we had a little group called the Courtland Historical Association, and it was created to put these little plaques you see on buildings all over town. And the scheme was, Richard's mother was very influential in getting that going, and Dee Dee Martin, and then you could name a dozen other people that fell right in. And the point was, let's collect money and do things historically to enhance Courtland to the viewer, to the visitor, and to us, because we learned a lot of things about how old this building or that was. Well, Ted came to this group and said, I need help. I want something in buildings. What can y'all think of? Well, somebody said, why not a museum? And was that your mama probably? And you know, Darlene probably brought that from life experiences elsewhere where she had seen a museum and she thought it good, and so why not have one? Well, then we start getting started, and everything was going fine for me. I was a new member of the association and not involved in much of anything, and that suited me fine. I still had grass to cut. So anyway, then Mary Valentine Gibson, I don't know how many of y'all know her, but her family grew up here. There's some things in this museum from her family. I'll tell you something funny. If you lived in Courtland, grew up in Courtland, and you moved to Decatur, it wasn't too long before the two Valentine girls could be viewed coming by your house at about 4 miles an hour, both of them looking. I don't know who was driving, because they were both looking at your house. I had that happen where I heard a car go by, and I was out pruning or something, and I looked up, and I said, there they go. And they loved everybody, and all of us children were their children. Indirectly, they both owe maids. And so anyway, that's just part of the Courtland thing. And if you could bottle that and put it in here, people would really get a kick out of that. But that's something y'all might think about, is find somebody to get folks to tell stories. We thought about trying with a tape recorder. And of course, you know, that's died and gone to heaven. We don't do that anymore. But anyway, so we start to get, I remember one picnic in the park or something, we had an easel right here with a welcome to the Courtland Historical Museum or something. We hadn't refined the name we wanted to have yet. And we had a sign up there saying, you're one of the first visitors. What do you have that might fit in our museum? Talk to us about it, or something like that. And visitors came in, and we got a slow start. Well, I was asked to be on the acquisitions committee because they said, hey, you know a lot of people, Decatur, Courtland, that, you know, have roots down here and might have something to bring. So we started doing that, and it grew by leaps and bounds. I was asked to be on the acquisitions committee, like I told you, and the chairman of it was a girl new to Courtland, Evelyn Dibb. David is her husband. He was a judge. Anyway, Evelyn's husband, when he finished his judging work in Decatur, came down here and bought Miss Carrie Hotchkiss's house, and that's where they've been ever since. They have children about my children's age, so they knew a lot of Courtland folks that through children. That's how we all meet new grown-ups, is through the children. And one day there was a real sad tragedy. Her son was killed abruptly over in Anniston. And she grabbed me and said, "You're now chairman of the acquisitions committee. I can't do it right now. I've got too much grief to carry." So you don't hesitate when somebody offers you that kind of deal. So I got going. So we were getting things one at a time. But like I said, the easel and an announcement. We did have a historical plaque out front. Whoever was doing that got one in here. And we started collecting stuff, and nobody knew what they had that we wanted. We didn't know what a museum was. None of us were trained. So feel yourself not out of touch. I don't think I'd been to too many museums, but Mary Gibson, like I said, had connections. Her family, her part of the Ballantines came from Pulaski, and they were still up there, and they probably still are today. I think Mary maybe even have a family home up there now. One day she told me, she said, "They've got a nice museum in Pulaski. You ought to go up and see it, and you can understand a little better how they go about doing things." Well, dumb old me, I was retired, and I could do it. So my wife's still teaching school, didn't go with me, but I go up there, and she had introduced me by telephone to this docent up there, and I get there, and he said, "This is basically a World War I museum. Joe Blow, a citizen of Pulaski, served in that war, and he brought everything home. He was a pack rat." So I'm going through there looking at it. You and I go through a museum, and we look at different things. We like different things, and that's what makes a museum good for many kinds of people. And I'm going through there, and gosh, yes, it was 80% World War I, his stuff. And all of a sudden, I'm looking down in this cabinet, and there's this little thing, and it looked very much like this. And he said, "What you looking at?" And I said, "What's that?" He said, "I thought that was it. It gets everybody." He said, "You don't know what that is?" I said, "Looks kind of like a ballpoint pen to me." He said, "And you'd be dead like 95% of the people that saw this thing themselves." So he gets it out, and he tells the story. He said, back in World War I, it was the same folks that fought World War II, the English, the Germans, the French, the Americans, and some other little countries. He said the Germans were coming up with all sorts of innovations like they always do, and so they said, we're outnumbered, so we got to take their numbers down. So what they did is they plant these things all over a field that they knew the Allies were going to charge through. And so if this was stuck in the ground, as it would be with about that much of it showing, and I stepped on it, and it exploded like it's supposed to, guess what happened to my feet? My foot or my feet? Not a good thing. Well, I'm injured, maybe dead, but say I'm injured. How you going to get me back there? We didn't have all the Jeeps back in World War I. It would take you and you, and if I was a big guy, it might take a third person. So that takes 4 people out of the front lines. That caught my eye. I'm a systems guy. Phil and I spent a lifetime, and your dad too, and others making 3M work. And so I just said, "Oh boy, I like that. That's a good way to do what they had to do, the job in front of them." But that's just the kind of thing you do when you go to a museum. You go in and you see things, and 90% of it is, "Oh, that's nice. Not in good condition." Yes, it's in good condition, but here are the things that really catch your eye, and everybody's going to be different. So when somebody comes through, you can't give them the same pitch and hit them all. Now, you will try that. I used to, when I was a docent, I would start off with a little overview. When we got started, honest to God, we had no plan, nobody helping us. Some people had been to museums before, some had never been. But we started off, and I made some notes, and I know it all because I've lived it. And that's the way any docent does, is you grow with your experiences. I said Courtland, Alabama time periods. And we go back to the early 1800s. And really, if you go count the Indians, they go way back. But so that's, what is this, 2025? That's 225 years or 200 years. I'll pare it back a little bit. So we've got a lot of history. It's what do we want to show people? And what do we like? And where does it come from? I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that you'll get a kick out of. But one of the things we talked about, and we sat down and we said, okay, what's important about Courtland? Why do we like it? The first railroad west of the Allegheny Mountains. Courtland, that train track is it. I was a senior at Auburn, and I had to take some electives. You know, I took all my chemical engineering stuff, and then I got around to electives. And so what am I going to take? I said, history of Alabama. I was born a history buff. My mother had me reading early on. Good for me too. But anyway, I said, okay, we had 4 or 5 things in history. I took history of Alabama, and the first day the professor says, anybody here know the first railroad west of the Allegheny Mountains? Well, my hand went up. Well, I was in a class. I was a senior, and these were cute little girls, freshmen and sophomores in education, all those things girls take. And I was just in hog heaven after being an engineer in all those years to see girls in a classroom. But they looked around at each other like, what in the world is he talking about? Well, I raised my hand. He said, what's your name, boy? I told him. He said, Mr. Rebman, how do you know that answer? I said, because I live 2 blocks from the train tracks. And he said, oh, where's that? I said, Courtland. He knew then I had him. So he asked me to tell the story. Well, so that got attention. And then let's see, the next thing that came up, he gets to that point in the early 1800s, and he says, you know, Andy Jackson was a big figure in southern 1800s. He was all over New Orleans with Battle of New Orleans, all over the middle of Alabama with the Creek Wars and everything. Good book out on that if you ever want to read it. And then Nashville, he had the Hermitage up there. Well, he and Andy was now a character. You got to understand him. If you read a book on him and it's honest, you'll see a little bit of plus and minus. But he had the Hermitage up there, but he had a running group. I don't know, 6, 8, 10, probably varied depending on who could get away from their wife and go places. And he'd go places. In Madison, Huntsville was a big spot because that's where the first federal land office in Alabama was. And so they would come down there because things were happening. That's where we got the paperwork to create Courtland. We got a document in here on that. I don't know. Let me explain to you. I mentioned having to redo the museum. When we took everything out and put it back in, it's in a little different spot than I find it. So don't be surprised if I'm surprised to find this there and that here. It's okay. There is no permanent place for anything. And if that bike starts moving up on the ceiling, I'm gonna head for the door. I don't know about y'all. But anyway, we start getting into things. And the first thing that could immediately come to mind was the first railroad west of the Allegheny Mountains. And so we have displays and information, and y'all gonna have to excuse me because I'm not as up on where everything is right now, but we put it right in that corner to start with. And the reason we did is I bought a little model train and put it in the window. And we could run that little booger around and all the kids could look into big windows. But every now and then, no matter how dutiful you and I were as a docent, somebody'd get their hand over there somehow. And I actually found a model of a train that actually operated on our little train tracks back in those time periods.
It's behind you. It's all right there.
Okay, well, I'm thinking I had a model.
We still got all that.
Okay, but you know, it's amazing you can find that. But I found a guy in North Carolina using the internet, and believe me, I'm not good at the internet. I do what I have to do. And I found this guy, and he said, yes, call up this company, this toll-free number. They got all sorts of model trains. And they had one, and we got it, put it in there, but we had an engine that was exactly the engine. Now, let me ask you a question. Where do you think you got a train engine in 1825? The only 2 places I knew that made them then, England and up around Erie, New York, and that part of New York, because they had the Great Lakes and they had the Erie Canal, and any canal was a horse-drawn buggy or a boat. And if you could get a motor to it, that was great. So put a train track on it and you're going. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into that. I could, but I won't.